Hello, everyone. My name is Anand Galapati, and I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of MHPSS.net. It's actually a great pleasure for us to co-host this webinar with the Olympic Refuge Foundation on the very important, but I think perhaps not widely enough recognized area where sports and mental health and psychosocial support intersect, especially in the area of populations affected by displacement. To start off the webinar, I would like to give the floor to Professor Alistair Ager, who is co-chair of the think tank of the Olympic Refuge Foundation, but was also incidentally in at the very birth and early years of MHPSS.net. So it's especially nice to have you here with us, Alistair. Over to you.
Thanks ever so much, Anand. And just to echo the delight to be able to convene this meeting, which is marked particularly, I think, by this idea of uniting networks and groups that may be a little familiar with each other's work, but a real opportunity to connect more effectively. I'll be moderating this session along with my co-host Ramat Hamdard, and I'll be handing over to him shortly. But just as an overview of what we're aiming to do, as I say, bringing together practitioners from the fields of sport, mental health, psychosocial well-being, with particular interest in youth and displaced populations. And we'll be sharing something of the research that we've been engaged in, and particularly pulling together materials for a database that we're going to talk about and share a little later on. We've got a great panel of speakers to present diverse perspectives and bring things together over the next hour and a half. And it's the diversity, not only from background, but discipline in terms of sport, psychology, gender and development, neuroscience, all the rest of it. But it is an unusual privilege to feel that we're stitching together a really important expertise and making it into a more coherent field of study. So you'll hear a little bit more from me in a moment or two, but Ramat, I just want to hand over to you just to explain a little bit more about how we're going to run the session.
Thank you, Alistair, and welcome everyone. My name is Rahmatullah Hamdard. I am the CEO and founder of Hope for Education and Leadership in Afghanistan, and currently working as case manager at one of the international organizations here in St. Louis, helping refugees with different needs. I'm also an MBA student at Chevet School of Business in St. Louis University, Missouri. So I'm so excited to be moderating today's session, and I hope that we will have a great session today. So before we go any further, I would like to cover some few ground rules for today. The first thing that we need to note is that please note all the audience members are muted throughout the presentation, except during the Q&A. If you have a comment, you do have the ability to raise your hand to get to them all during the webinar. Please do introduce yourself in the chat, and also finally we ask that everyone treat each other respectfully in this virtual space. No hate speech or discrimination will be tolerated. With that, I think we are good to go. We are delighted to begin with a brief message from Alistair of the ORF.
Thanks, Ramat. And yes, again, delighted not only to be attending this webinar, but to be contributing with my hat on as a co-chair of the Olympic Refuge Foundation think tank. And some of you may be fully aware of the work of the Olympic Refuge Foundation, but some may not. And this was established in 2017 on the basis of the first successful participation of the refugee Olympic team at Rio in 2016, with the particular mindfulness of the importance of involving those that are displaced into sport and providing an opportunity, particularly for young people who are affected by displacement, to thrive through sport. And the think tank was established as one of the mechanisms to get thought leadership connecting in terms of the way that the fields of mental health and psychosocial support, the fields of child development, but also particularly the field of sport and development might more effectively come together. And the some of the presentations today are reflecting in terms of the database. one of the work streams of the think tank in pulling that material together to make it more accessible to the diverse users of potential material. I really want to get out of your way quite quickly to enable the panelists to present particularly more detailed areas of work, but I wanted to give a little bit of an insight into why I've been so infused and encouraged by the events of the last few months in pulling this material together, and indeed then the webinar today. I come from the field of MHPSS, and as Ananda was saying, you know, linked to the birth of MHPSS.net, and even before that, we go back a long time. And I'm quite proud of what this field has done. One of the contributions or the areas that I've been particularly involved in is the notion of structured activities and the value of providing structured activities at a time, particularly for children and youth in a time of uncertainty. But if I'm honest, over the years, I think initially we just thought that structure was important, the exact type of activity was less relevant. But the last few years, there's been a real awareness that it isn't just having structure that children and youth need, but there is a way of being really effectively trauma informed in that work. And clearly, sport provides a really potentially valuable set of activities. First of all, in involving physical activity, we've come to much more understand the role of the body in its interaction with the mind in the sense of well-being. Clearly, sport also provides potential positive role models of engagement with adults. And then whether it's a team sport or even like skateboarding, not necessarily a team sport, but something that involves a collective coming together, there's a real value in the social connection that sport brings. But that's the perspective, if you like, from the MHPSS out towards sport. But in reading much of the material that I was involved in, some of the review of documentation, it was really encouraging to see many sports and development practitioners working towards similar conclusions, but from another direction, aware that sport is a great convening power for youth, bringing them together, the potential of sport for establishing personal agency and social engagement, and the value of safeguarding, creating in sport a safe environment, a protected environment to bring benefits for children's broader well-being. And I think we can see really important developments in the sports area over the last decade or more, an awareness of the way of building agency for youth through sport. But some people in the sports arena may not be quite so aware of the advances in MHPSS work and understanding ways of promoting mental health and well-being in displaced populations. And what's been so great in looking through material is to see these two fields, these two networks increasingly collaborating and really doing important work together. And whether it's soccer or skateboarding or martial arts, some absolutely brilliant resources, seeing how the activities and the metaphors of sport can be really effective. And on the other hand, tools from MHPSS, whether it's the classic MHPSS pyramid of understanding the layers of response, whether it's tools like PFA or faith-sensitive materials, culture-sensitive materials, I think we're at a really important point of seeing the interaction between these fields forming a substantive and coherent and accessible set of materials to support relevant activities for children and youth. So it's that's my little blurb. You have a sense, hopefully, of my genuine enthusiasm and encouragement at this. And I'm sure that over the next hour or more, as we hear from speakers and some more of the detail of their work, you will share some of that enthusiasm and encouragement for the way that we can share learning across these fields for more effective programming for children and youth. Rahmat, back over to you.
Thank you, Alistair, for your great comments, and thanks to the Olympic Refuge Foundation for their leadership on this project. This is such a wonderful project. And now I think we are moving to our research and database. And here we have Maria Bray. Maria Bray is she is a member of the Olympic Refuge Foundation working group that led this research. Over to you, Maria.
Hi, everyone. So thank you very much for your introduction, Alistair. I think that I mean, a lot of what you say resonate to me in the kind of journey that was undertaken by the MHPSS field together with organizations like the ORF Foundation. So I'm very happy to be here with you, and honored actually to be able to present a bit of the findings that the research that we were mentioning earlier, which was done by the ORF MHPSS think tank. Just a quick maybe view on what actually we did it. We did together with this ORF think tank subgroup, which was named Guidance and Tools. Maybe next slide. Can we jump to the exactly what we're going to be talking about now for the next 10 minutes. So the decision was, and I will come back a little bit on the reason on which led us to go in that direction, but we embarked in a journey where we mapped tools and resources in order to give practical guidance and also on how to employ sports and physical activities for mental health and psychosocial support for young people affected by displacement. We have collated these tools and resources into one consolidated public database. And we are making practical recommendation how this information can be shared and made available to practitioners and other collaborators to promote its use and ensure ongoing innovation. Next slide, please. So just why did we actually embark in this journey? I think, I mean, at the really start of the initiative of creating this ORF MHPSS think tank, a survey was done actually with its member in order to identify, what was the key area on which we would like to focus our research and contribution to the sports of sport and to the field of sports and MHPSS. And one strong element coming out of this survey was the importance of ensuring that we capture good practices, recommended training materials, methodologies, and ensure the dissemination to support the field in using sports for MHPSS objective for use. We know that there is actually a lot happening out there. I mean, there's a lot of activities ongoing using sports for youth, but very often there's not proper time taken and resource allowed to actually really able to capture these good practices and disseminate them further. This also links with the fact that very often, I mean, coaches and facilitators use sport, but without sometimes deliberately using it for its full potential in terms of mental health and psychosocial support outcomes. And this is the same, that stands the same for the mental health professional that are not always aware of the evidence and methods for using sports to improve mental health and social bonds. So we realized that this knowledge and awareness gaps meant that we might be missing an enormous opportunity to improve mental health and psychosocial well-being for many young people experiencing displacement due to different climate, war, economic migration, and other security challenges. Next slide, please. Thank you. So just sharing with you the gaps and the strengths of the many resources that we actually identify. To start with some of the gaps identified all through this 120 resources that was compiled, we found out that unfortunately, and this is not so surprising, but most of them are in English. Many are in a long form PDF format. Most of them are not localized for specific context. They can be intimidating because of their length and academic language used. They are often not so easy to find and to access. Some of the tools use a variety of terms that sometimes practitioners might not be associating with mental health, such as peace building, belonging, wellness. And there's a few, quite few actually, that are gender responsive, which means what we mean here is that we ensure that they include particular reference to the needs of boys, girls, women, or trans or non-binary persons. are actually generated by young people for young people. And here again, there might be many great approaches and tools out there, but they are not, capitalized on and captured. And few are produced in the global south. So these are some of the challenges we identify in the resources that we compiled. Next slide, please. On the other hand, there are some great strengths. As I mentioned earlier, there are 125 resources that was listed, which is actually quite huge. And even if mostly not only, of course, focused on refugees and IDP context. Half of these resources are including MHPSS consideration besides sport. So they're really looking at both aspects. Most of the resources aligns with the ISC MHPSS pyramid level 2. I will just come back on that in 1 minute, which is actually referring to the fact that most of this the guidance identified are referring to type of community and family support, and some of them targeting level 3, which speaks to focused non-specialized mental health support. Even if, as I was mentioning earlier, this is not so much, but we want to also put forward that still some are identifying to really be gender inclusive. This is around 18% of the total of the resources. And again, even if not much, some were directly produced in the global south. And 10%, even if we hope that this number would increase with time, are youth-led resources. Next slide. So maybe before showing you how actually the database look like and how it can be used, we just wanted to emphasize on one of these key elements that helps us to bridge the MHPSS and the sports world. And this is the ISC intervention pyramid for mental health and psychosocial support. So as mentioned earlier, and as you will see it in a minute, this is one of the fields upon which the resources were mapped. We believe that this reference can support MHPSS practitioners because most of them might be quite comfortable and already using this intervention pyramid. And this can really help them to fully integrate sport as a potential MHPSS intervention all through the 4 layers and types of support. It's also a tool that we believe can be very useful for sports practitioners for them to know in order to better connect sport and the different type of mental health and psychosocial support outcome which can be reached with sport. So as some of you might not be so familiar with this pyramid of intervention, I will just very quickly go through it. So it shows the diversity of the MHPSS approaches. So for non-specialists of the MHPSS field, often when we think about MHPSS, we mental health and psychosocial support, we think about individual specialized services that are delivered by psychologists or psychiatrists. And this is part of the services, but it's not the only type of service. And this is located in the 4th level of the pyramid that you can see at the really top of the pyramid. Below, the level refers to the intervention that can be focused, but that can be also delivered by non-specialists. That means people that are not psychologists, not psychiatrists, but that can actually do quite a lot in terms of mental health and psychosocial support if supported by training and supervision. Below that, we've got the 2nd level of the pyramid, which we were referring to earlier, strengthening community and family support. And we all know that people, who feel distress, children or adults often get support directly from families and friends and community peers. And so this layer is very important. And this is where we locate a lot of the outcomes linked with sports. As we mentioned earlier. And the bottom layer is about social consideration in basic services and security. It's about involving people with disability or marginalized in all activities and services that we actually provide. So I hope that, this is really, we believe, something that can help us really easily bridge, where does sports, according to the way it's proposed and the approaches that are used, can really fall into the different categories. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of the database in an Airtable. We have several fields, as you can see here, and this is only showing a small part of the total fields that have been used to cluster and to organize the resources. And these resources can be, I mean, you can look for resources by region, by language, by format, by the type of author, by the level of intervention on the MHPSS IASC intervention level, as we just mentioned, the type of sport, whether it comes with a youth-led initiative and much more aspects. So we'll be sharing the link on how to access this table, and I'm really encouraging you to play with it and really look at the different fields and seeing how, you know, sorting out these different resources linked with your area of interest. Next slide, please. So you can also have a detailed view of each resources. This is another way and format that is proposed to you to have a look at this at the different resources, highlighting again some of the key fields that we just mentioned earlier. So you can search again this and look at the view linked with the fields that you are interested in looking at closely. And then finally, last slide, please. In terms of the different tools associated with this database, we have featured 12 standout resources that are actually identified as accessible, easy to read, gender inclusive, grounded in evidence. So, and this kind of more visual way of featuring these resources can also be, I mean, much more easy and accessible, I would say, to the different audience that we hope reaching with this database. And so, of course, today we've really started with featuring 12 of these standout resources, as I was mentioning, but I mean, much more could be done. And I think this is again linking up with the type of format and thinking what would be the best way to share this information. Next slide. So, I mean, doing all that, how do we hope that this will be used? I mean, I think that first of all, we are still currently identifying platform to really helping sharing and accessing, I mean, making sure that this database is accessed by mostly all the people that it could, I mean, be interested into it. And so we are currently in contact with various platforms, including Sport and Dev. But I mean, the idea is to imagine that these resources could be plugged and included in various platforms. We hope that this can really help engaging existing networks around the common purpose. I mean, this is what we are doing today with the support of MHPSS.net community. We've been also engaging with the Sports for Coalition for Refugees through a discussion that we had in the last June. And so we really believe that this can be an opportunity to open up discussion around this important field of work. It's also a good way to promote awareness of good practices, and we hope that we can continue creating easy to digest briefs, you know, because we spoke about the challenges for some of the audience linked with the type of format, with the language. So this is something that we hope that will be able to be done soon to continue and make sure the resources are accessible. And we also believe that it can really support innovation and sharing from the global south. I mean, we are continuously trying to reach out to networks to identify resources that might exist and that we might have not yet reached out. So this is also another opportunity to do that and really ensure that we can make this database grow and make sure that it includes all what would be relevant to display here. And it's also, of course, a way of we believe, a way to invite young people to the table to collaborate on building knowledge. And we hope that, again, through different formats and, for example, at the ORF level, there's a community of practice with whom we engage, and we hope that, you know, through them identifying youth that can be coming around the table and feeding this reflection and prioritizing, you know, the fields that needs to be invested would be also the way forward to prioritize. Next slide, please. So this is the QR code where you can access directly the database. I think that also some links will be shared in the chat. They have been shared. Sorry, I just seen that. Thank you, Talia, for that. And so where you can have actually access to the different views. And last slide, finally. So, of course, the idea is to continue growing the community of practice, as you understood, for different purpose, for all the different purpose I mentioned. And so we will be coming back with this question at the end of this discussion today. And we will have a few questions for you to make sure that this can happen. Thank you very much. And I'm handing over to Hamad for the next steps.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you so much. I believe it's a wonderful database and also wonderful resources. I personally loved it, and I'm sure the audience also like it because I can see it from the chats. So now we are moving to our panel discussion. We have some great panelists. I have just one announcement that Mr. Muhammad Zakaria would not be able to join us today. But instead, we have a great panelist, Zainab Hussaini, who is working with Skadistan International as country manager. Beside the other panelists that I have, Katya Vero, who is a dance movement therapist working with Team Up War Child Holland. We have Nicole Matuska, girls director at Women Win. We have Leslie Snyder, psychiatrist and public health professional. And finally, we have Megan Bartlett, who is founder of the Center for Healing and Justice Through Sports. Before moving to our questions, I would like to announce that we will have time for Q&A after the breakout room, and also during our breakout room, our panelists would be able to answer any of your questions. So my first question comes to you, Nicole. So during our mapping research, we learned that it is important to create resources that are short enough and clear enough to be accessible to a wide array of users and simple enough to print out and carry into, excuse me, into the field or pull up quickly on a phone. Nicole, you have been involved in creating some high quality gender inclusive resources. What is your process for sharing knowledge and methodology?
So, great question. Thank you so much. It's a great question. And, first, I just wanted to say thank you so much for letting me join this panel of so many amazing practitioners and people in the field. So really honored to be here. And yeah, to answer your question, because I know we don't have a lot of time, I think to zoom out a little bit, a way to sort of approach this often is to look at the tensions that exist when creating these resources. And one is a resource, a tool being contextualized enough for the local context, being really accessible and useful to people on the ground using it. And that often requires working deeply with communities and actually funding those communities and those organizations on the ground to create the tools themselves and connecting them with the right experts and organizations to do that, which is really a direction that Women Win has been going into. We used to do a lot several years ago of creating tools and getting input and feedback from the local communities, but creating them ourselves. And then feeding them down. And we've really shifted to taking that funding and those resources and actually supporting organizations on the ground to create those tools and resources. And that kind of then answers the question of, what kind of resource do they need specifically? Do they need a set of index cards that they can take into the field to use for that particular program? Or do they need a set of PDFs that they can print out and bring with them? Is it a digital tool that they need? So really working with those local organizations to identify what their specific needs are, and putting resources and funding into that. And then our role being really then to take that resource and try to create sort of a global version that can then be contextualized by others around the world. So, taking it, starting with the local, bringing it to the global, then so it can be taken back to the local, if that makes any sense. And that way, and in that sense, we put resources into putting it online for those organizations. Language justice is a big thing here. So putting a lot of resources towards translation into different languages, interpretation during webinars and conferences when we're sharing those resources. And then, also thinking about, what these resources look like, I think is a part of that. So really, reflecting from the field what is needed and putting the budgets basically into making those resources and listening to what people need on the field. So that's kind of our approach there.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for your insights. So now we are moving forward. Zainab and Katya. In general, many of the existing resources are not localized for a particular region. How important is it for mental health and psychosocial support programs to take into account local cultures and social dynamics?
Hello, Zainab, would you like to give it a go, give it a start, or?
Yeah, please go ahead. I will go after you.
Hello, everyone. Now, before I start this, I wonder, talking about localization, and I'm wondering if we can do a little something in movement with each other, the panelists, and maybe the ones listening, just to bring us in our bodies, because I notice the anxiety level in my own body, my heart beats beating fast. So maybe most of our contexts start in a big circle. So calling the big circle on screen. So one way to do this could be to extend your right arm and the left arm to the side. So that could be one way to make a circle, starting in a big circle. Maybe stretching up, so breathe in, and maybe lowering your arms and giving yourself a big self hug to thank yourself for showing up today. Yeah, thank you. That already feels a bit more landed in my own body. So one way for us where we have localized, because Team Up is, let's say, goes further than the sports. We broadened it to movement. And what is movement? It's sports-based, it's local group games, it's songs, it's rhythm, it's creative movement. It's body-based practices, whether it's breathing, whether there's yoga. So it already taps into so many of the existing resources in the countries that we work in. And so very often with Team Up, when we go in the field and we start to work with the facilitators and the children, the communities either recognize these games and either give it the name. So for instance, the lion and goat in Palestine will be the fisherman and the fish, or in Uganda, it's the lion and the goat. And for us, for me in Canada, it's the cat and mouse. So the local or the contextualization of all that we do really happens in the field with the children, with the facilitators during our trainings when we're working. So that's a big part of our contextualization and our localization. So in one country, they might be singing Ram Sam Sam, and in another country, they might be singing some of their own songs and their own traditional songs that have been existing for many years. So I think to simplify it in one way, this is what I mean by contextualizing and really tapping into something that is really ingrained or in the body of the children and the teams that we are working with. And that develops a really quick sense of ownership and agency. Yes, I can do this because I know this, I recognize this. So that would be briefly a very simplified way of explaining something that I wanted to share today. Zainab, I don't know if you'd like to add or continue.
Okay, hi again, everyone. Sorry for my voice, and really nice to meet you, Rahmat, after a long time. So in Afghanistan, where I'm coming from, and I worked over 10 years with the children and sport in Afghanistan, I really don't see professional or good resource for mental health for children, except the sport we are doing originally within our programs. So actually, no one works on professional mental health resources or mental health support in many of the organizations. And as I was just reading this in the background of this webinar, that we are doing mental health support with sports, within the sports we are doing in our programs, but we don't know, we don't recognize them. But we are doing this for the children, and I agree with that. We see a lots of progress and development after children join the sport programs, whatever program, like related to sports, skateboarding, football, basketball, chess, volleyball. After a while, we see lots of changes, and we see that they are feeling better. I can say an example of the change we were experiencing with one of our students who was a drug dealer. At the beginning, we didn't know that he's a drug dealer. And after a while, when he joined a skateboarding program in Mazar Sharif, he decided to just come to the program and go back to school. It was all about the impact of skateboarding. And after that, he shared the story that I was a drug dealer and I was trying to sell drugs to the other skateboarding students, but he stopped thinking about selling drug. And the other example which I wanted to share is it is not localized in most of the countries like Afghanistan. And it's really difficult to access to the mental health support, which is localized. When we were trying to put our children in touch with one of the psychosocial organization, it was supposed to pair them with the psychologist via Skype. And it was just really the first time for the children to sit behind a computer, and it was very stressful for them. They didn't know what is this and what's going on, and they were not ready to talk with the psychologists and share their stories. Some of the students, they were victims of the internal war, and they were the internally displaced people who moved to our who moved to other safest provinces. And they were, some of their family members were killed by Taliban in front of them, and they were really traumatized. And then when they were paired with the psychologist told us that all these children are normal, they don't have any trauma. That's why we say that mental health support needs to be localized, and we need to find ways which is working, especially in countries which are experiencing war. And that's very unfortunate that there are not like easy access to mental health support, except the sports and other activities we are doing for children to help them to just come over and come along the traumas they have. And it will take longer time to help them and support them. Thanks.
Thank you, Zainab. It's also great to meet you again. I do agree with with Zainab and Katya that the mental health support needs to be localized, and everyone have to have access to it in every corner of the world. Yeah, so I would go to Nicole again. So Nicole, only 80% of the resources and tools that we mapped are gender sensitive. What should organizations do to ensure their curricula and tools are gender sensitive, and why is this important to you?
Yeah, thanks. Another great question. I think a good check always is to ask the folks that represent the community and identify across, the entire gender spectrum, like, what do they think about the resource, about the tool? Do they feel like their lived experiences, the issues they face, the barriers and obstacles they face, how they navigate their lives and communities is reflected in the resource? And people across the entire gender spectrum, however they identify, really do have different lived experiences. And is that resource acknowledging that space? Is it holding the space for those discussions and those approaches? And at Women Win, we do this in a variety of ways that and ways that we can, and the best that we can. And one of those ways is to create or support the organizations we work with to create sort of advisory circles or committees to help us provide input into the resource, the curriculum, the toolkit, whatever it is. But I think the more direct way to do this is to really either co-create or directly fund organizations to create these resources in the Global South and actually do collaborative, kind of design approaches with the community. So supporting frameworks and approaches that actually bring in the community, whether it's the coaches, the facilitators of the program, the participants that they're reaching through the program, the guardians and parents or stakeholders in the community, and co-create these resources together. And that often takes different timelines. It takes longer to create those resources. It takes more budget or allocating budget in different ways to create those resources. And so I think it's really rethinking how we allocate funding and budgets, rethinking timelines around resources, and rethinking how we configure and combine the right people and bring the right people into the space to co-create and collaboratively create these resources. And then I think, and so then having those gender sensitive approaches reflected are a lot easier, because then you actually have representation of the community creating those resources. And then I think it's taking it a step beyond that and not just creating gender sensitive approaches, but really gender transformative approaches in our resources. So gender sensitive approaches are really important, acknowledging that gender norms exist in the community, outlining what they are. That's absolutely essential as a starting point, I think, for our resources. But I think if we strive to really be gender transformative in our designs and approaches, so that's addressing the root causes of these inequities and including ways to transform them through our programs, is important. Good resources allow staff of organizations, coaches, players to really think critically and creatively around how we find solutions and how they can find solutions and make sense of this in their own context. So that's kind of another layer to add when thinking about our resources. We really want to move towards gender transformation and finding those solutions within the community through these resources versus just pointing them out. So that's to mention that.
That's a whole bunch of information. Thank you so much. Yeah. So Katya, at War Child, you're developing activities for Team Up that are evidence-based and rigorously tested. Can you speak about the testing process and what the eventual goal is to share Team Up?
We're going towards evidence-based. I was still on the mode for inclusion. So yeah. I don't know if I can continue on the line of Nicole just briefly, but what's been fascinating to see just today as I was looking at the number of children reached this year, to bring it back to the field, we've reached quite an equal number of girls and boys. Of course, now talking a more binary way of addressing this topic. But what I find interesting for me is Team Up was developed regardless of gender, ethnicity, ability, race. And when we talk about inclusion, I find it really interesting that it doesn't exist in isolation. And so what makes it accessible? Are we making sure that the girls, the mothers, the child mother that's coming, is there someone to take care of the children when they're coming to their session? Is there a place where they can change? Or did we connect with the parents prior to them participating, and so on and so on? So for me, it's so interesting that inclusion and participation doesn't exist in isolation. And to bring it more to the evidence-based component of it all, it is a long journey, and we are getting there with Team Up, and it's been a wonderful 6-7 years. We started with a pilot evaluation, evaluating the quality of the implementation, is doing what we're doing, really set out to do what we wanted to do. So we developed some great checklists from that, the fidelity checklist, and many other tools that we then included in our first, well, I guess we could call it a quasi-experimental study or rigorous evidence-based study, where we had some really significant results, where we saw that there was a significant reduction in traumatic stress, an increase in friendship and in well-being. And now this year, well, 2023, we're moving on in our research journey to a randomized controlled trial. So those are the different steps that we have been taking. And what's been very interesting to see is that Team Up has a theory of change, a pathway to change. Like what do we want to see? More social connectedness. We want to see children who feel seen and heard and protected, so the safety. We want to see children who have a positive outlook, who have self-regulating capacities, and within a co-regulated environment with trustworthy, caring, trained facilitators. And so all this research work that we've been able to do is really connected with this theory of change. So it's been a really humbling and grateful journey, hard-working journey, but I'm really happy to see that this research is growing and flourishing as well in the communities where we work.
Thank you, Katya. Thank you so much.
That's it for me. There's so much more to say, but I stop there, Ramat.
Okay, so now we have questions from Leslie and Megan. So when implementing sports programs in displacement settings, why is it important to consider what kinds of stressors or adverse experience people have had? How do sports programs help them with these experiences or potentially cause harm?
Thank you so much. Megan, shall I jump in? Is that all right? Okay. First, it is such a pleasure to be here with everyone. And I feel this is a really important question at the interface of sports and MHPSS work for two reasons. One is that we don't want to do harm with our approaches. So we want to be able to tailor them appropriately for young people who were exposed to serious stressors. And the second is that we really want to maximize the benefit of what we're doing. So we need to understand then what young people in displacement contexts may have experienced and the particular risks they may be still experiencing. So what are their experiences in their community or country of origin that caused the displacement? What about through their journey? What dangers did they face? And in the place they've landed, what are they currently experiencing, which could be stigma, discrimination? What quality of social support do they have around them? And that last point is important because displacement really implies this potential loss of significant family and friends and community supports and structures, and all of these things that really comprise the social safety net whereby children and young people grow and get their needs met. So in a displacement situation, they have to adapt, they have to be resourceful about getting their basic needs. And they often have to build a new community with the barriers of new systems and new languages, new cultures. And of course, I think what's also come up already is this potential exposure to critical or traumatic experiences, gender-based violence, experience or witnessing violence, detention, deprivation, insecurity. So the evidence shows us that sports and physical activity with young people who have experienced adverse childhood experience, it can prevent and mitigate the harmful impacts of those to their mental health. It's protective and it's promotive. And we also know that social support is one of the most important factors that influences how people recover from critical events. So when you blend sports and MHPSS programming, you have the potential to really provide that trusted adult mentorship. And I heard Katya also use the word trustworthy. So that trusted mentorship and wise accompaniment of young people who've been exposed to serious stressors and displacement. So it's an intersection of really important things that young people need for their overall health, their mental health, their psychosocial well-being. That's the safe and positive place to play, to be a child, to learn skills such as teamwork and fair play, handling frustration or loss constructively, managing emotions, and then building relationships, and particularly relationship with a stable and caring adult. And I think that's foundational for all children. But for those who have been through displacement or serious stressors, these things are profound, in fact, because they contribute to healing and recovery. And they help them build communities and relationships in a way that strengthen identity and belonging. And they even may provide a pathway for future livelihoods, because some players with lived experience then go on to become coaches. And that is a pathway also toward life purpose and meaning coming out of the adversity they suffered. So just to kind of wrap this up, I think of certain principles when I think of mitigating harm and maximizing impact: safety, dignity, and then equity and inclusion. And when we're doing sports programs, we need to think, okay, competitive sports has the potential to trigger conflict, to trigger violence. So how do we ensure safety? In multicultural teams, it's important to be aware of the players' biases to effectively address discrimination or stigma or violence among the participants due to gender, ethnicity, religion, abilities, race. So how do we ensure everybody is treated with dignity? And then lastly, we need to be not only aware of the need to mitigate harm, but also how some experiences or some young people's identity may pose barriers to them engaging in sports. So some who suffer from mental health problems, for physical or intellectual problems, or from serious distress may not engage readily with sports. It may not feel safe or appropriate for some young people, such as young women. And we need to address these types of barriers if we want to ensure equity and inclusion. So underscoring this, and something that we found in our recent pilot training, are these particular needs for trust building with young people who have been exposed to serious stressors. That requires nuanced skills. And both MHPSS and sports people bring valuable techniques and tools to address trust in that mentoring and coaching relationship. I think I'll pass on to Megan.
Yeah. Thanks, Leslie. Yeah. I want to echo all the things that have been said about the value of sort of the intersection of MHPSS programming and sport. Although one thing I think we haven't named that I think is worth calling out here is, we're talking about the value of trusted adults, obviously paramount to making sure that particularly young people who've experienced significant adversity feel safe in the environments in which we're creating. The value of movement. Thank you, Katya, for the movement and getting us into our bodies, and how important that can be in terms of sort of the neurobiology of stress and trauma. And then there's one more piece that I think we don't name as readily around sport, and that's that sport provides the sort of manageable patterns of stress that have been upended by the experiences that displaced populations have had. And so for me, I know this is my instinct, is that when I'm working with a young person who's experienced overwhelming stress or significant trauma, or just has had too much going on in their lives than they should, my instinct is a little bit to wrap them up in bubble wrap and hope nothing bad ever happens to them again, right? And so while that might help keep them from harm, right? Maybe I can help protect them from further harm. We know that the opposite of overwhelming stress is actually not no stress, right? And so how do we replace the overwhelmingly traumatic experience with the right doses of experience, right? So the opposite of overwhelming stress is not no stress, it's the right dose of stress. And so what I find in sport programs that can be really valuable is that the concept of mastery and the idea that you're turning up the stress dial in little ways to help create these manageable challenges for young people at small amounts of time, and how resilience building that can be, how we create those, we sort of reintroduce the more normalized patterns of stress for young people after they've had such overwhelming experiences. And I think that's an important part of what makes sport unique in this context, is that we can in real time create those patterns of resilience building stress that young people need. So I would just sort of say, in addition to the great value of movement, sort of paramount need for trusted adults, there's also this great experience of, if we facilitate it the right way, the creation of these manageable patterns of stress that really can change our neurobiology, that can change the biochemistry of our brain.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Leslie. I think I need to move fast because we have short time, and we need to cover all the questions that we have for our panelists. So Zainab, you have been working at the forefront of youth inclusion in the US, Afghanistan, and other places. Can you speak to how your team designed the program to meet young people's need in various locations? If you could tell us, like, in short, so that we can get to all questions.
Sure, yeah, I will not talk too much. So we believe that children, whatever, if they are in Afghanistan or they forced to move to other countries, I mostly work with refugees and IDP students, internally displaced people. So the needs are the same. It doesn't matter if you move to a new country. So the feeling and the trauma they're experiencing, they are coming along with them to a new country, even if the situation gets worse. So we use the same tools and resources we have, and we are using for all the locations now all around the world. And we just make them like what is the most need for each location. So in US, when we were working with the newly refugee students, we were just selecting the specific lessons or tools, which is more shaped for those students, and we will see what's the most need of them. So I'll just repeat that the needs are the same. It doesn't matter where they are living and where they are now. Everything is the same. The children are children. It doesn't matter if they are in US or they are in Afghanistan. And it was quite working in both locations we were working. It was the same. The needs are a little bit, I can say, different when it comes to culture. In US, we have more freedom. We can include dancing, singing, which is forbidden in Afghanistan to practice with children. Or girls and boys are together here. But in Afghanistan, we have to practice that no boys and girls, no female coach for boys, no male coach for female students.
Thank you, Zainab. It's so true. I agree with you. So coming to Megan, in the last 5 to 10 years, it seems that our awareness of how physical movement can help people through challenging times has grown a lot. Are there some breakthrough insights that stand out for you as being key to unlocking the potential of sport to support young people's mental health?
Well, I think the work that the folks here are doing is definitely sort of living that. And to me, I think the way in which people are being more thoughtful about this work, I think we thought for a long time that we sort of anecdotally knew that sport was good for young people, and have thought really about that as sort of skill building and the opportunity to work with other young people and develop those traits. But I heard a couple of my fellow panelists talking really about much more fundamental skills like regulation skills, and much more things that are much more about sort of lower on the hierarchy of needs in terms of what young people, particularly young people who've experienced significant adversity, really need. And so I think the switch from sport being sort of a nice to have and just a sort of joyful, positive experience, which it is, of course, it's those things, but also thinking about it as this more serious intervention and more helpful at every level of a young person's development, particularly for young people who've experienced trauma or traumatic experiences or significant adversity. I think that, to me, that's the biggest change, is that people are starting to look at it as something that's part of a holistic development of a young person, not just sort of as an add-on, but really as a foundational intervention.
Thank you, Megan. The folks here are really working hard to help young people around the world. So thank you so much from everyone. So again to you, Katya, how are the needs of young people affected by displacement similar or different to those of young people in other adverse circumstances? And why is movement therapy particularly helpful?
Oh, wow. What a question. Let's start to bring it back to the impact of any kind of stress, chronic stress, stressful life situation, traumatic life events, and look at the impact of that on our bodies, regardless of the setting and the context. And I think layering this, so adding one chronic stress on top of each other, one traumatic life event on top of each other, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stressful life events. So I like to think it more in terms of not so much who is where and what happened to who, but these layers of events that happen to the communities where we work. And I think if we understand the impact on that, on the body, on the mind, on the emotional, on all the components of an individual, then it's also easier to understand that what we see exists on a continuum. So because I'm a second level, the Team Up is really working at a second level, but I come from a specialized care. As a dance movement therapist, I really come from a specialized care, so specialized services. And I was always thinking, how can we bring these concepts accessible to the community? And for me, what's really important is is working with our facilitators, working with the parents, working in the communities where we work to make this knowledge accessible so that we understand the impact of this stress, of what that does to the body and to the mind and even to the soul and the spiritual part of a. So for me, it's not so much about the different contexts and settings, because all of them have their different layers. So what's important is to understand that these layers and that these different pile of stress exist, and learning to identify those and understand those, and understanding how it's affecting the community. I don't know if that's an answer, but it's one way to look at it instead of thinking, okay.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, Zainab, as a last question from our panelists today, your team has organically developed an innovative sport and MHPSS program that has been scaled to other locations facing similar social inclusion challenges. How has your team gone about sharing their knowledge and methods more widely to new locations and with other organizations?
Fortunately, we are working closely with the organization which they exist in the new location we are working. So it's more easier to share our resources with them, and like a shared resource. We are combining their resource and our resource to work, because we are new in the locations, and they are helping us to see what's the most important need of the program, which needs to be implemented to the new locations. But as I said, we use our original resources. I see a question here for me that it says the resources and the curriculum needs to be different, because it's about refugees and IDPs. So we are working in a country which the discrimination is already exists, and we are seriously working with our children and our beneficiaries to know that we are an organization who are working in this field. And so mostly the partners we have in various countries are really helpful, and they are just helping us to implement the program. And mostly in like in US, in Sweden, and Belgium, there are skateboarding organizations who are working for years on those countries, and they are just using our resources of whatever is needed for the programs.
Thank you, Zainab. Thank you so much. So at the end, I would like to invite Alistair to share some of his insights about the value of bringing together a community of good practice on sports and MHPSS. So why is it important to bring together this wonderful community?
Yeah, well, actually, I think it's probably more useful that we use the time for breakout. So all I'm going to say is we're going to go to breakout groups in just a moment or two, but I think just to really thank the panel for some really wise reflections. There's been some quite vivid experiences. Thank you so much, Zainab, for examples, for sharing examples from Afghanistan. And I thought, really interesting from Maria and Nicole and Katia about localization and about co-creation. And then I thought I particularly appreciated discussion laterally from Megan and Leslie about some of the complexities and the balance in terms of recognizing harms, in creating new communities, in creating trusted adults through sport, and Megan, that notion of an evolution, a maturing of our thinking, I think, of sports intervention. So I think we've had a really wonderful time of wise sharing. We want to have a little bit of time at the end just to talk about how we might take some of this forward, some potential actions, some reflections on potential communities of practice, etc. But we do think we should have a breakout session just to give people a chance to put Q&A, particular questions to panelists. So Anand, I think we're ready to go to that now. And so we just have 10 or 15 minutes to have a chance to chat with some of the panelists and just go through some of the questions that have come up in the chat. So you'll be in a breakout room very shortly and an opportunity to chat to at least one of the panelists. Thank you all for that discussion. And again, I think there was some real wisdom in the plenary, the panel, but there was a chance then to speak to some of our speakers a little bit more detail there. So just as we wrap things up, we wanted very much to flag that although we think this is a useful event in its own right, sharing some material, sharing some insights, sharing some wisdom, we want to do the best that we can to connect it to ongoing activities and broader activities and where this might go. And there are some ideas within the ORF group, but there's an opportunity here. We would like you in chat actually over the next 5 minutes as we just wrap up, if there are particular ideas that you think are important, to flag them here. One of the key notions is about encouraging communities of practice, and I think encouraging is the right word. We're just talking in our breakout about existing strengths and existing capacities and how one nurtures them and connects them rather than necessarily creating things. But in terms of creating greater connection between the sports community and the MHPSS community, then what would people like to see? So the mailing lists or blogs and so on, or the idea of trying to identify particular themes or sub-area workshops and so forth. And I think there is a second slide you want to go to, Talia, I think we could go to with some other ideas on that. While we're waiting for slide 14, I'll just, oh, sorry, it's that final slide. I do apologize. So in the chat, and perhaps I want to call on Leslie, because you can give one example of something. There was a question around actually, rather than just thinking that we're sharing experience, of idea of developing some intervention models and so on. So thank you, Talia, for putting things in the chat. Leslie, do you want to just mention some of the recent work we've been doing, for example, around PFA sport as a way of again building intervention models, or
Sure.
intervention model linked to the discussion we just had is building skills, capacity, sensitivity within the sports community?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Alistair. And this came up also in our breakout room with a couple of questions. And this is an initiative, PFA Sport, PFA standing for Psychological First Aid. And it's an initiative of the Olympic Refuge Foundation. And what we're trying to do is build bi-directional capacity between mental health and psychosocial support actors and sports actors in meeting the mental health and psychosocial well-being needs of young people. So we want to do that by increasing the mental health literacy and basic psychosocial skills among the sports sector, ensuring sports programs are psychologically safe, developing and strengthening referral pathways for young people who may need more support, and also increasing participation in sport and physical activity. I think also we want to build the capacity of MHPSS people. I know for me, this is my first foray into really working in sports, and I feel I have so much to learn there. We did just have a pilot of this in Paris a few days ago with 16 wonderful coaches, some with lived experience. And, you know, there were certain lessons came out of that. They are confronting a lot of challenges with the populations with whom they work. So they were very, very eager to understand how, if they're doing the right things and if they're doing no harm, they want to share their techniques and tools as well as learning for us what evidence-based approaches are there. They want to understand the limits of their role and how and where to refer. So it's not only about just having referral resources, but can we access those and how can young people access those? And then another important point that came up was self-care and team care for coaches. So we are hoping that this will, just as resource development takes time. We feel capacity building also takes time, that this can be an investment in a community of practice that will grow over time to provide. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Leslie, just for a little flag of that other sort of thing. And I think for many of us, it's an excitement of connecting across. So I think silos is perhaps too strong a word, but the idea of connecting together across traditional fields of practice is really quite exciting, and really seeing sport as a key developmental activity that supports mental health, and also and a supporting for MHPSS work to promote the effective use of sport. We're pretty well out of time. There's just a couple of things that I wanted to flag just as we come to a close. There's lots of information and links in the chat, including the link to the database that was shared earlier. There's some blogs on broader work. There are a number of other things that are there. We'll be in contact with those that have registered in due course anyway with a follow-up. Obviously, the material has been recorded, so you're welcome not only to review it, but to share that with colleagues who may want to review and reflect on some of the discussions that we've had. And basically just to see this as a key point in making some key connections, and encourage people to make bilateral links as well as people they've seen online or have said something that they're particularly meaningful. I really encourage you to follow up with them. Because we're talking about community building, network building, there is a request for you to, if you're uncomfortable to put your camera on just for these last 10 seconds or so we can take a group photograph of just the community that came together today. So that's really my last encouragement for you. Let's look to see from the world of sports and coaching, well-being, mental health, psychosocial support, development assistance, the range of people that we brought together today, and impressed by the shared wisdom, but also the shared commitment and compassion towards engagement in this field. So thank you so much for your time. Thanks, Ananda, and all your colleagues at MHPSS. .net for supporting and connecting us in this way, and really appreciate everyone's efforts. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Alistair, and thanks to the ORF and all the panelists for such a informative webinar on I think a genuinely exciting area of work, and also to everyone who joined us today. There seems to be a lot of interest in continuing the conversation exchange, and please note that we'll be sharing a link in the chat for a very, very short exit survey, so you can tell us how you found the webinar, but also how you'd like perhaps us to at MHPSS.net to follow up on it. And please note, we're going to be posting the recording of this webinar on MHPSS.net and also on our YouTube channel in the coming week. So just from all of us here, thank you again for coming, and please take care until next time.
Thanks, Ananda. Thanks all.